Okay, we are just going to go ahead and get us started. Thank you, everyone, for joining our call today. Good morning. And this is a webinar around capacity planning from an Agile perspective. And we will go ahead and proceed. Keep in mind, this meeting is being recorded. This webinar is being recorded. And we can always view this for future purposes, right? We can always refer back to this recording anytime you do need to. All right. I will go ahead and share my screen, and we will go ahead and get us started here. All right. I will pause on my video, just minimize distractions, and we'll walk you through a webinar on capacity planning. All right. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Let me just get us into presentation mode. Okay. Again, welcome. My name is JUDE OKOGBENIN, and we're just happy to have you here. We're going to talk about capacity planning. The best practices, optimal strategies for the Agile team on how to actually do capacity planning. Like I mentioned, we'll go over some good practices, get some real hands-on situation going, and then have a flair and a feel for how truly we can perform capacity planning. Again, these are all based on my experiences in the Agile world. We'll go over my experience in just a moment. And then the other thing we'll also talk about is how we can gain insights into those effective approaches that would allow for seamless planning from an Agile standpoint. Okay. All right, cool. This is our agenda for today. We'll kick off with an introduction of myself. I'll tell you a bit of my background and what I've done in the past. And then we'll now dive into the meat of our meeting today, right? So what is capacity planning? Why do we need to perform capacity planning, right? So who performs it, right? Who's part of that conversation? Who contributes to the information that goes into capacity planning? Again, this is all from an Agile standpoint. All right, when is this done? All right, we'll dive into that a little bit. So essentially, when is the best time to make sure that you have your resources aligned and you understand what the availability is? And then from a timing standpoint, when are they available to do this work? All right, and then the crux of what we're here is how is it done, right? I know there are templates and spreadsheets and things out there that actually you can plug and play and just do this. But even prior to that, it is beneficial to actually understand what goes into performing capacity planning for an Agile team or a Scrum team, as most folks will say, right? So we'll get some hands-on there, some hands-on exercise. And then I will also, at that point, just pull up a spreadsheet, and then like a template, and then we can fill that in and just kind of see how the numbers play out. But it'll be good, like I said, to get that hands-on, understand some of the theory around um, um, capacity planning. Okay, and then when we do the spreadsheet, it'll all make sense. It'll all come together. All right, cool. All right. So by way of introduction, again, my name is Jude OKOGBENIN. I have been in the Agile world for quite a number of years, and I'm currently an enterprise Agile coach. I do have my SPC certification, so I'm a safe practice consultant. I do have a lot of experience around release train engineering, just managing trains from an art standpoint as well. All right. So in my past life, I've also held roles as a Scrum Master, project manager, a program manager as well. So I've had a few hats. A lot of my experience has been in the financial sector, more than a couple of decades now. So that's the primary area that I do have my experience in. And basically, I have a lot of experience delivering technology-related projects. I have participated and also helped to facilitate, um, you know, Lean Agile implementation and transformation. Um, and what else is out there? Yeah, so I do have a passion for delivering strategic solutions from a technology standpoint, optimizing business performance within an organization, and just help to build and lead teams to deliver business value for our respective partners. All right, so that's a bit about me and my experience and my background. Okay. All right. So next on our slide, let's get into some of this discussion around why we're here today on capacity planning. All right. So what is capacity planning in Agile? Right. As you see here, for a few bullets that I've put together on our slide here. So capacity planning in Agile basically just helps us to determine how much work an Agile team can complete in a sprint or an iteration. A lot of folks will, go back and forth with using sprint or iteration. Basically, really means the same. Um, so it just tells us how much work an Agile team can complete. It helps us in understanding what that team's availability is for the upcoming sprints. And when you do capacity planning, it isn't just a one-time event, right? It needs to happen frequently. It's agile, right? So things do change as you're delivering value, as you're delivering on your project or your product. Um, you know, things do change. Resources do go in, come in and come out. People are away on vacations and things like that. Business partners may be changing requirements, or they'll be moving around priorities that might impact the skill set that might be required to deliver on on the requirements. So doing capacity planning should not be a one-time event. It needs to happen more frequently. And, I'll talk about the cadence in a few slides down the road on our call today. Okay. All right. So just to summarize, capacity planning in Agile, right? It just helps us to understand what that work is, how much work is an Agile team able to complete in an upcoming sprint. Okay. What is that team's availability in an upcoming sprint or sprints? All right, so our next slide here is why do we need it, right? There's got to be a reason for us to spend time to carry out this very important event as an Agile team or a Scrum team. All right, so the first bullet here is around we do not want to overcommit and under-deliver. Right? So for your key stakeholders, right, you want to be able to understand what the team's capacity is. And that will help you understand how much work you can deliver for your key stakeholders. As you know, business partners or technology stakeholders would want everything, right? And they'll want it yesterday. And as a team, that is not realistic for us. That's not possible, right? You wish you could take on everything and deliver on time without issues and without any blockers. But as you are well aware, things do happen as you work on a sprint or in an iteration, right? And so if you overcommit, you're not setting expectations to the stakeholders that, yep, I got this, you'll get everything that you need on time and within budget and with the right quality. That doesn't always happen, right? We should not be committing to work that we haven't really factored in what our capacity is. And then when you do overcommit, you end up, in many cases, under-delivering. And when that happens, you have very, very upset stakeholders, right? You just don't look good in front of them. They do not trust you, and they will not be very happy with you. All right. So why else do we need it? Predictability, right? As a team, you want to be able to be predictable. Being predictable helps to increase trust, right? So going back to the example I gave about stakeholders, right? So once you're predictable, once they know, oh yes, this team can deliver X number of story points every couple of weeks, every 3 weeks, every 4 weeks, right? You've already set the stage, you've already set the expectations based on what your capacity is. So the stakeholders can automatically, right? It's almost like you've now automatically trained them to understand what, in terms of points, in terms of your availability, what you can deliver, right? So it's easy to have that conversation when they're trying to move things around or when they're trying to push more work on the team. You can easily say, yep, sorry, Mr. or Miss Stakeholder, you already know we can only do 30 story points, every couple of weeks. This new requirement you're about to add will put us over that, right? So something has to come out from what we've already committed to if this new item here is very important to you and has to be delivered within this period, right? So being very predictable is a good thing. And then maintain the team's sanity, right? Is another reason why we need to do capacity planning, right? Because you don't want to just keep throwing things at the team, right? They will not be very happy with you. Okay, they'll be stressed out, they'll be burnt out, and you don't want that on your team, right? So when you do have your capacity planning done, everyone's on the same page. Everyone's come together to do that work, and everyone has an input into their own capacity. So when you do assign them work and when they're working on something, they already know and they can plan their time and just make sure that whatever is assigned to them gets done completely, gets done well, and gets done on time. All right. Another reason why we do capacity planning is it helps to identify gaps in skill set. Right. So say, for instance, as you're performing your capacity planning, right, you already have at the back of your mind, or you do know that there's a requirement somewhere out there that requires like a UI developer, right? So when you're doing your planning, you can easily that just jumps out at you, right? If we, for instance, we have a number of um, um, stories, and the dev team can deliver quite a lot of those stories within their capacity. It might just come out that, oh, wait, there's a gap here in the number of QA people that will need to deliver on this, right? So that can easily just pop out when um, you do capacity planning. Okay. All right. On our next slide here is when do we perform this event, this exercise? So first of all, the Scrum Master takes the lead on managing this process, performing this exercise, right? It requires participation with the team. So the team being the developers, the QA, the folks actually doing the hands-on keys exercise, building the code, doing the development, um, performing the testing, right? It's those are the core people that needs to participate and provide their input into their capacity. And we'll go into this a bit more in detail in upcoming slides. The capacity of the Scrum Master and product owner are not factored into this exercise. They need to participate in the event and just understand what's going on, but their capacity will not factor into the team, primarily because they are not the ones building the actual solution. They're not the ones doing the actual validation or testing, right? So we really just need to understand, um, you know, who needs to do the development, who needs to do the testing, um, the list of those developers, and some places call them QA, some organizations call them testers. Okay. And then when do we do it, right? This exercise should be performed just prior to sprint planning, right? So, for folks to understand or know what sprint planning is, that is an event in Scrum that, formally just kind of kick off the upcoming sprint, right? And then the purpose of the sprint planning, it just helps to define what can be delivered within a sprint and how that work will be done, how that work will be achieved. All right, sprint planning is done with the collaboration of the entire team, right? It's not a one-person show, right? You need input from every key role during sprint planning. And so prior to getting into that sprint planning event, you need to just know and understand everyone's capacity, because you don't want to get into sprint planning and then start debating, oh, I don't think I'll have time to do this particular item from the backlog. I don't think I will not be available, this week during the sprint, right? So you need to understand ahead of sprint planning what each key role's capacity and availability is ahead of sprint planning. So when you do get to sprint planning, you already understand, yep, I got 6, 7, 8 folks on the team, and 5 of them are going to be available 100, like, okay, throughout the entire sprint, right? Or, well, wait, there's a holiday, someone's going to be out on vacation, or someone has a doctor's appointment, right? So we need to understand and kind of factor those considerations before we get into sprint planning. All right. On our next slide here, I just wanted to take a brief moment to just address team capacity versus team velocity. I think a lot of folks use this interchangeably, and that causes a lot of confusion, right? And so I just want to try to see if I can make this a bit clear for folks, and you're just going to understand what the differences are between team capacity and team velocity. All right, so team velocity is based on actual story points completed in a closed sprint. Meaning, after a particular sprint is done and closed, you go back and look at, hey, how many story points as a team did we actually complete in that prior sprint, right? 10 points, 20 points, 30, 40, 50 points, right? So that is that team's velocity, those story points that were completed. So you actually did the work and you deliver that value to the business, to your key stakeholders, saying, yep, you asked for this amount of work and we delivered on this amount of work, right? So the work is done, the work is complete. That is that team's velocity, right? That is that team's ability to do that job, meet those requirements, deliver on those requirements at that particular point in time. Whereas for team capacity, that is based on a team's estimated or projected future availability for the next upcoming sprint, right? Versus velocity, team velocity, which is in the closed sprint, it's in the past. Team capacity, you're now trying to understand and project what the team's availability is for the next sprint. So the work isn't done yet, but you're trying to estimate as much as possible, as best as possible, knowing what you know today for what the team's capacity will be in order to deliver on the next sprint. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so from a planning perspective, velocity can be used to determine the number of product backlog items the development team could bring into the next sprint while maintaining consistent burn down rate. What does that mean? It means when you're not trying to plan how much work the team can take on for the next sprint, the team velocity, which is what the team was able to accomplish in the past sprint or past sprints, that can be used as an indicator to have a fair sense or an idea of how much work the team can take on for the next upcoming sprint. Capacity from a planning perspective or from a planning standpoint, that helps in understanding the development team's availability for upcoming sprints and the number of backlog items that the team can truly bring in based on their available capacity. Said in another way, capacity just, like I mentioned earlier, it just helps you understand for the next upcoming sprints, for future sprints, what is the team's availability? And then you factor those things and determine, okay, from our backlog, from our sprint backlog, what can we pull in to work on? Okay. How do we do it? In a simple word, in a simple world, in a perfect world, wouldn't it just be easy to just say, hey, we've got 8 hours in a day, and there are 5 working days or 5 business days, Monday through Friday. And if you have one person on the team working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, that is 40 hours per week per person. And so if you do have 8 people on a team, that will be 8 people times 40 hours per week, which equals 320 hours per week. And in a 2-week sprint or 2-week iteration, you multiply 320 hours per week for 8 people times 2 weeks. That is 640 hours for a 2-week sprint for 8 people. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Like ideally, this would be the perfect way to determine a team's capacity. But unfortunately, it's not that easy. It's not that simple. It is not that straightforward. All right. I wish it was, but it is not. Okay. Let us just kind of understand why. Okay. So what do we truly need to consider for capacity planning? Like I just mentioned, right? It can be just that straightforward. 40 hours a week, Monday through Friday, 8 hours per day for each of those days, right? So 8 times 5 is 40. 8 people on a team, 320 hours a week. For a 2-week sprint, that's 640 hours. It just doesn't work like that. And so you see each of these bullets here, on what we need to consider when we're planning for capacity for an agile team. First, you'll need to understand the sprint duration. So prior to sprint planning, you should already know what your sprint duration is, right? Is it 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? So each of these bullets, we'll just kind of go through them in our upcoming slides. The second thing that you need to consider is how many hours per day is a person or a team member truly assigned, truly working, truly focusing on that project or that product or that team. We'll talk about that. And then when you're building your numbers for capacity planning, you also, the third bullet there, you also need to consider other factors that might impact someone's availability for the upcoming sprint, right? Do they have vacations coming? So you need to factor those in. All right, and then determine a realistic utilization rate, resource utilization. We'll talk a bit more about that, but basically, when you say someone is 100% assigned to a team, to a product, are they truly working 100% of the time? Or are they truly focused 100% of the time? On that train, on that team, working 100% of the time, working for that 8 or 9 hours, right? So we'll go through each of these bullets and hopefully you'll get to understand more. Okay? All right, so let's take a step back. All right, so you need to understand, like I mentioned, is prior to the sprint planning, what your duration is. A week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Most companies tend to operate on the 2-week mark, but sprints should ideally not be longer than 4 weeks, no longer than 4 weeks. Because after that point, it gets really, there are too many factors, that can throw things off, right? And I rarely see 4-week sprints in all of my experience. 2 weeks, like I mentioned, are the most common. I have seen organizations that do 3 weeks sprints. So you want to settle somewhere between 2 and 3 weeks. That way, you're able to determine one, availability, because anything greater than 4 weeks, things do happen. People can easily fall sick, family emergencies, travel, holidays, something, right? And then the market can change. The key stakeholders can move things around. More work might come in. Priorities might shift. So you want to be able to be, very flexible enough to adapt to change, to be able to switch gears quickly. When you have a shorter duration for sprints. All right. So try to stay between 2, at most 3-week sprints. And then your math and calculation also gets easier with 2 to 3-week sprints. Okay. And then, just for folks that are not clear on what a sprint or iteration is, these are time boxed periods like I said, between a week and 4 weeks at the most, during which the product owner, the scrum master, and the team, comprises of like the developers and QA, right? The testers. I always use QA, but like the testers. So these are the sprints or iterations are time box periods um, that the team work to complete a specific product. Addition, updates, new work, that type of deal. All right. So during a sprint, work is done to create new features based on the user stories and items that we pull from the backlog. All right. And typically, a new sprint starts immediately after the current sprint ends. Okay. All right. So, in our second bullet, right, we need to understand and calculate the collective number of hours per day um, per team member. All right, we should never assume that the team will be 100% productive on the sprint work, right? Every second of the day, every minute of the day, from 9 to 5, it is honestly just not realistic, right? It's not possible, right? So do not assume, oh yeah, there's 8 hours a day, 9 to 5, like we did the math earlier, right? A few slides ago, and that's what that person's capacity is. All right. When you present such numbers, senior leaders, when they see that, they say, oh yeah, 8 times 5, 40, 40 times 8, 320, right? Oh yeah, you have over 300 hours to get this work done. Why can't you do it? So you need to just make sure they understand that no, it doesn't happen that way, right? It's just not realistic, right? No one can focus 100% 8 hours in a day, 5 days a week on their task, right? Um, for example, right off the bat, each day, there's an hour gone for lunch, right there. All right, so you're already down to 7 hours as you start your day. So you now have 7 hours, you know, within which to complete your work for that day. So you can quickly see how that 9 to 5, which is 8, jumps down immediately to 7 hours once you start your day. So you need to set expectations with your key stakeholders and senior leadership on, yeah, no, folks it's not 8 hours a day on your task or your requirements. Okay. All right. Other factors that will impact your availability or the team's availability. As you do your capacity planning, you need to factor in those things, those activities that will take folks away from doing work in that sprint on a daily and weekly basis, right? You need to factor in meetings, right? You know how meetings are, being pulled into different meetings. If there's an issue or something that needs to get discussed, production, defects, bugs, requirements, sprint planning, PI planning, retrospectives, those kind of Scrum and team events, those take time away from your now 7 hour day, right? So you need to factor those in. So you can see we started at 8, we're down to 7 because we took an hour for lunch, and that 7 we have meetings. that even further reduces that team member's availability to do work for that day within a sprint. And then there's training, right? So folks might be off taking some time to do training. It could be an hour, it could be a couple hours, it could be 4 hours, it could be a day. And vacations, people need to take their vacations, right? So it might be during the work, during the sprint, the work that they've been assigned, they're not going to be available to do it. So you need to factor those in and set expectations correctly, appropriately with your key stakeholders. They can say, oh yeah, Tracy's not going to be around a couple of days, couple of weeks here. Mike is going to be off a few days here. So this particular work, because these are the only two guys that have this skill set, this requirement here will not be able to be completed until the following sprint. So you can actually start to see how you can make those how you can have those conversations with the key stakeholders. And then there's holidays, right? You need to factor in if there's a holiday that falls, somewhere in your sprint. So that will be hours that we'll need to subtract, or that takes away time for folks to actually do work. All right. And then they're going to be unplanned events, right? For instance, someone could fall sick during a sprint, and so work will not get done if there's no one else that has that skill set to pick it up, right? And if there is someone else that can pick up that work, what happens to that person's already assigned work, right? So that's why there are factors that will impact someone's availability in a sprint that we'll need to factor in. Okay. If there are no questions, we're going to go on to the next slide. So the next slide here talks about utilization rate, resource utilization. So like I mentioned earlier, a few slides ago, folks cannot be 100% focused on their work 100% of the time. It's just not realistic. It's not possible. Right? There are, outside of, okay, wait, we got lunch, we got, all of these factors that we'll need to consider. And then even on top of all of that, right, there are even distractions, right, that might even take focus, or that might even take focus away from folks doing work, being focused on their work. All right, your phone might go off. You might need to, if you're working remotely, like many of us do, since COVID, the kids might be home. You might need to attend to them. You might need to just go grab something to eat. Just distractions here and there, right? So, and then sometimes you just need to have a break, right? Just kind of walk around, go chit chat with someone, in the office, if you're in the office, or just kind of take a quick walk around the house or your neighborhood if you're remote, just to kind of clear your head, right? Especially if, you're trying to figure out a solution to an issue or problem. Okay. So that's what this is really. This resource utilization rate is just, it accounts for those distractions. Again, you also want to set the expectations with the key stakeholders, right? Saying, yeah, we factor that into our um, planning for upcoming sprint. And so this is very subjective, in my opinion, right? A lot of folks, depending on their organization and depending on their team as well, have different numbers that they use as their resource utilization rate. And you'll see the map once we kind of go through in our next slide, right? I have used 75%, 80%. I've seen some teams that have used about 70% for their resource utilization. So it all depends on the organization and as well as the team. So you can, from time to time, make adjustments to that percentage once you get to know your team, how they continue to improve, and then you can just do some adjustments. So I typically start around 80, 75, 80%. But a good rule of thumb is to factor about 80%, and then you can make adjustments as the team becomes more mature, as a group, and as individuals as well, working individuals. Okay, you got no questions? All right, so let's put it all together, right? How do we do that? How do we do that? So remember, so we said one person working 7 hours a day, right? So 9 to 5 is 8 hours. We're down to 7 hours because we have that hour for lunch. All right, people have got to eat, otherwise they will be cranky. So we're not down to 7 hours, right? And so I'm in that first row there, row A. Okay, and then we'll subtract about an hour for meetings and non-sprint related activities. So right there, you're down to about 6 hours. Again, we're not factoring in the Scrum Master and product owners, right, into this math. It is mostly and just the folks that are hands-on keys doing the development and testing. So basically the developers and the testers, or QA, as I typically like to interchange them with. Okay, so we're down to 6 hours after taking out an hour for meetings and an hour for lunch. All right, and then so then multiplied by that resource utilization percentage, 80%, which is the rule of thumb, a good rule of thumb that I mentioned earlier. And so when you do 80% times 6 hours per day for one person, so now we're down to 4.8 hours per day, which that team member, that person, that developer or tester, that is what we're saying. That's the number of hours per day they are focused on doing the work to provide that business value, or doing the work that meets those requirements. Okay, and then you multiply that 4.8 hours per day for 5 working days, Monday to Friday. All right, and that gives you 24 hours per week per person. And so if you have 8 people on a team, the total capacity, factoring in all this consideration that we've talked about from row A to row C, 8 people multiplied by 24 hours per week, That's 192 hours per week. And if you're working on a 2-week sprint, if you multiply 192 by 2, the 2 weeks, that is 384 hours per week. I'm sorry, 384 hours for a 2-week sprint. So you can see this is a huge, significant difference from the original 640 hours that we calculated earlier. If you recall, the 640 hours is the 8 hours per day times 5 days, which is 40, right? Times 8 resources, that's 320, times 2 for a 2-week sprint, which is 640, right? So that's why you should not just take a blanket math or calculation or consideration when doing capacity planning. You need to factor in all these other activities, all these other considerations, all these other focus factors, so that you can get to a somewhat realistic number that the team can work on, and that the team can use to work on delivering business value or working on those requirements. Okay. All right. So I would like to, at this point, just kind of show you a spreadsheet. So this is doing it by hand, right? This is doing it on paper. Like I said earlier at the start of this webinar, this conversation, I wanted to get you guys to do hands-on, understand the logic and the theory and the process behind it, so that when you do use a template or a spreadsheet, you actually do understand what those key things that you're entering in are. Okay. All right. So give me a second here and I will pull up a spreadsheet, a template. All right. That's this one here. Let me just try to zero these things out so that it'll make sense. All right, so this is a capacity planning spreadsheet that I put together. You can see column A is the role of a team member, their name, location. Location could be, since most folks work in a global organization, right? Or many people work in a global organization. We need to just consider, the hours. So if you're offshore, it could be 9 hours, onshore, 8 hours, right? And then this section here, rows D through M, those are the dates in that sprint, in the upcoming sprint, all right? And then the hours that are available. This is a calculated field. It just adds up the number of hours per day that the team is available. Okay, and then this is the resource utilization. Remember, I talked about the 80% focus factor. All right, this is also a calculated field. All right, so we'll talk about the bottom section pretty soon. All right. So I'll just go in and just quickly fill out this form so that you can see how it looks. We can say developer 1. All right. We can just put anybody's name here. Mark is onshore, and then from the week of the 22nd, he says he's going to be fully available. So that will be 6 hours per day. So remember, 8 hours per day, an hour for lunch, an hour considerations for meetings, right? So we'll just do 6. Okay. And 6. Okay. All right. And then I'm just gonna just make sure this is summoned correctly. Okay. I'm gonna do that developer 2. Pick someone or put me in here. Offshore, for instance. You know, um, I can do say 7 hours because I'm offshore. Factored in a couple of hours for lunch and things like that. Okay. All right, and then let's say we do another developer. Let's say I have 3 developers. And what can we say? I'll say Anne, and is onshore, and she does 6 hours. Okay. Okay. Let's just do one more. It's a QA1 tester. All right. Let's see. No Mark again. Mary, onshore. We do 6 hours per day. Okay. All right. Let's just take a pause there. All right. So you can see these are all calculated fields. And after you factor in your 80%, it tells you the total hours that the team is available for that next upcoming sprint. Okay. So all of that conversation, all of those, slides, and this just puts it all in one simple spreadsheet. And then the bottom section, let's see, average story points completed in the last 3 iterations. All right, so when you take an average, if it's an existing team, take an average of the last 3 sprints of the story points that you have completed. And the capacity, assuming the capacity was 400, right? You can go back and look at, actually, it's the reverse. Okay, yeah. And you can go back and look at the last 3 iterations of sprints and add up and take an average of the capacity, assuming that was 400, right? The average hours per story point based on those last 3 sprints is about 10 hours, right? You do 400 divided by 40. And so that gives you an idea of how many story points that the team can work on for the upcoming sprint based on this capacity here. Okay. All right. So quickly, I know we're at time. I think I just have a couple more slides here. All right. So we actually just kind of talked about this one in that spreadsheet. So basically, make this presentation mode. So basically, right, if you're trying to convert those hours to story points, if it's an existing team, just take an average of the last 3 sprints is what I typically do. right? Take an average of the story points completed, take an average of their capacity, how many hours, and just do the math. 400 hours divided by those 40 points. It gives you an idea of, oh, hey, they complete about 1 story point per 10 hours. So if a team has a capacity of 350 hours in an upcoming sprint, you could forecast that they will have about 35 story points that they can complete. All right, if it's a new team, right, and you don't have that historical context, what you can do to start off is just assign each member 8 story points. And then as you get through the sprint, as you have more sprints under your belt, you can now start to do those adjustments, just like on this slide here. All right, just to summarize, right? Doing capacity planning, it's not a straightforward, simple 8 times 5 equals 40 type of deal, right? You need to consider a lot of factors, right? One is understand the duration of the sprint, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then how many hours per day that a team is truly focused on that work, right? So we talked about at least, at the most, 6 hours, right? An 8-hour day quickly comes down to 7 hours when you factor in an hour for lunch, an average of 1 hour for meetings. So we're already down to 6 hours that day. All right. And then bullet 3, consider other factors that will impact the team or the person's availability, right? Vacations, holidays, time out, doctor's appointments, that kind of thing, right? And then determine a realistic utilization rate. We talked about the rule of thumb, 80%. Factoring all of that will help you determine what a team's capacity is for an upcoming sprint. That way you can set expectations with your stakeholders, become more predictable, you avoid overcommitting and under-delivering, and you keep a happy team. All right, some of the references that I got some of my materials from. So that, in a nutshell, is capacity planning. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please, add your comments. Let me know if there are any questions. And thank you for taking time to watch this video. Thank you. Take care, and keep an eye out for some more training sessions on various topics. Thank you.